just to be a bit more inclusive, even though the project itself, and we should acknowledge this, is a Maltese project happening in Malta around Maltese gardens. Having said that, I'd like to introduce the panel, so I'll just be moderating. I'm Glen Calleja. There's Giola, who's the artist, Mario Gerada, a researcher. There's Ethelbert Duca, I'm not sure what that does, Ethelbert, and there's Wendy Jo. I'll first ask you to introduce yourselves very, very quickly, okay? So.
I'm Curtis, and I teach 10 classes of photography, and photography is my main medium.
I'm Mario, I'm a social worker and mainly work in migration, and over the years I've developed a system of working with people, mainly who are asylum seekers or refugees, to tell stories about their life experience through plants, gardens, flowers.
My name is Ethelbert Duca. I work at the Environmental Resource Authority, and I am a very big plant fanatic.
I'm Wendy Jo Mifsud. I am a planner, and I lecture at university in spatial planning, and I'm also very interested in activism towards protecting these open spaces and public gardens and even private ones.
So, thank you. My first provocation, if you like, is about the gardens we imagine. So this exhibition speaks about memory, speaks about loss, speaks about enclosed spaces, private spaces, and so on. But what about those really private and intimate spaces? The gardens we imagine, the gardens we aspire for, wish for, and so on. When you think about the garden, when you say, oh, I wish I had that garden, that kind of garden, what kind of garden do you have in mind?
For me, I started off, for me, the garden is the cloistered garden, so I started from a spiritual, religious kind of perspective of it, and that remains for me the most important and intimate. But over the years, I realized that the garden could be a couple of pots in your balcony, and that you tend, that you grow, and it also serves an ecological, if you have rosemary or say or thyme or lavender in your balcony, it could still serve for the bees to feed it. But my garden, my personal garden is the cloister garden, the potato de canna.
For me, it's the same. The traditional, Maltese garden. I'm not going to say a large garden. Unfortunately, like most many young people, we cannot maybe afford to have such spaces. So the place where I live, for example, I turned my roof into a roof garden. So it's something that I did for myself to actually have access.
For me, it's very much a sensory experience. A garden, when I think of a garden, I immediately remember the sense of smell. So that's the most obvious for me. A garden means different scents. And then comes the sense of sight, where you see color and you feel maybe a breeze. And so it's this very sensory experience, which then helps me become very meditative in a sense. So it could be a certain typology of garden, but it almost a planted space. So maybe it can be constructed a bit the idea of a garden.
One of the, come to your idea of a garden, one of the key pillars of this exhibition seems to be the tension between what is man-made when you mentioned a planted space. So what is man-made and what is wild, incidental, and so on. The tent itself, on the tent itself, there are no human faces, no human figures, and yet it's a human construction, very clearly, it's an architectural sort of statement. Where does the human fit in your ideas of gardens? And what role? Is it the gardener who tends, or the person who imposes a certain structure, the well-curated gardens of Versailles, or these botanical spaces where they're over-curated? So you stand? Where does the human stand in your ideal garden?
The human is the person experiencing the garden, that is from my perspective. So whether it's a curated space or a space that is not curated, that maybe it would be an abandoned space which nature has taken over. For me, at least from my perspective, the human is the person absorbing all that planted space, that natural space has to offer. So I think that's a little bit it puts, I think, ourselves at the center of that. So there may be other perspectives on that. But we play an important role in appreciating such sensory environments, because we can then talk about valuing them and we can talk about protecting them if we place ourselves at the center.
So there's a sense of not just consuming the beauty of it, but there's a sense of guardianship.
It's consumption and value, which then leads to guardianship, of course.
And there are different perspectives on that. So usually I like the perspective of the garden being also art form and art. So the human is always participating with nature, creating the garden. For example, right? He says he's an architect, but he turned into a gardener, and he says it's the only art form that a human person can look into. And another perspective that is interesting is that many places that we think of as wild and natural and forests are actually man-made. Like indigenous people creating a forest that is a food forest. And so the tension is always what is natural, what is human. I think what we've lost is that, what you mentioned, no? The Versailles Gardens. The Versailles Gardens are an expression of humans dominating nature, controlling nature. And we know that can be very destructive. It will be beautiful when you look at it right at first. And I think where we're trying to explore, I see Giola's work exploring that, is how can the human person be within nature, but not as the dominating, the dominant, no? The one who controls nature, but the one who brings more life. And that is actually the perspective of scripture, if we go back to the garden. I mean, just one point, going on the sensory garden, but that touches me a lot, and that is, for me, not only the garden, but for example, flowers, and how I use flowers with people coming to promote clean water, you know, because it's very healing. The garden in Islam is specifically based on the five senses. So the classical Muslim garden, which also goes back to the idea of garden of Eden, is that, for example, you will never plant a plant that can hurt you, that has thorns except for the rose, an exception. And that the colors are always kind of soft and modest, and it always has to please the five senses. And that goes back again to the ancient idea of the garden, that the garden is a place where you rest. I don't want to take over, but it's important to remember where we're coming from. The idea of paradise is linked to what is paradise.
We get there.
We get there. Because that's where we need to start from.
Ethelbert, where does the human come into your garden? If they come at all, they said that.
Myself. Usually I'm always in my garden. My take the garden is a reflection of maybe the person. I've had friends which I go over, for example, and their personality, I think it shows in their garden. For example, mine, I like my garden is all messy, it's like a jungle. There are people who want them exactly, perfect, not even a single yellow leaf. Yes.
So an element of letting go in your garden is
For me, but other people can
yeah, of course. Giola, what does your garden look like?
I think
Your ideal garden.
my garden is a playful garden. For me, this is where the project started from. When growing up, we used to play in the garden, and when I go to the garden with my son as well, it's sort of I find it magical. You can just lie on the floor and look at the trees and look at the insects, and so for me it has a very playful element. But the human, I think, is, as we said, it needs to be a combination where you cultivate or care of it, but my gardens are rather in the sense I'm not very, my role in the garden is usually with the water, letting everything grow, or killing them by giving them too much water.
Overwatering. Overcare.
Yes.
Be such a
Because people tend to go, this plant doesn't need any water, I just don't give it any water in plants. Or else, this needs a lot of water. And so there's this, and there's also this myth as well, that the human sort of, either you have the fingers or you don't have the fingers, or the green fingers, but it's a process, it's a learning process. And for a long time I thought I didn't have these green fingers, but I've been learning throughout as we have our two trees that it's a process. I understand, I do something, I see what the plant likes and what it doesn't, and then sort of learn to like it. It's such a learning experience that we lose as well.
Picking up on this point, taking a very, very anthropocentric sort of point of view, what can we learn from gardens? Why should we construct gardens as learning environments? And is there, for example, Wendy, is there any value in that when it comes to planning neighborhoods or cities or?
It's been proven time and time again that spending time in a garden or in nature is very beneficial to us. And in water, we have a very high baseline stress level. And one of the reasons is that we don't spend enough time in nature. Sometimes linking to post-coloniality, and we can say that some people think nature is dead. So you don't play in the soil because you get dirty, or you don't play in the soil because you might be seen to be less civilized. And I think this is a narrative which we really need to challenge and to help our children go and get there is even the word for it, go and get messy, it's fun, and play in the soil because those bacteria are helping our microbiome, they're helping us have less stress, be better people eventually, and live a better life. And that then translates into other elements of the environment, because then maybe we are able to ask for a better quality of life, we are able to ask for better spaces. In my work, I do quite a bit of community planning, and I see a lot that people don't know how to ask for spaces which will help them be better people and live better lives. And gardens play such a big role in this.
I mean, challenging that a bit. I mean, there is a whole ethos of building and building and building. So we are constructing environments for ourselves. It's not like we are unaware of use of space. It's just the direction we take and what we choose. So how can we shift that? How can we shift this this appetite for stone and concrete to an appetite for shared soil, mud, leaves, and earth, and turn them into learning environments? How can we do that?
There is a lot of work on this as well, and collaboration going. I don't know where you fit, but I know that there's a lot of work being done.
Egypt.
Okay.
I mean, yes, speaking about agencies is fine, but how about the decentralized, the micro, the individual, day to day, our personal lives?
I think we need to go to the practical, in the sense that a lot of times something Giola was saying about watering. So the ancient mind when constructing gardens, not just simply constructing a garden, it was a way of meditation, of reflecting on where does a living person fit in the cosmos. So the garden is a controlled space to deal with this bigger, right? And the watering is often the problem that we, in coloniality and all that, we often forget that we are in Malta, with the climate in Malta, so we do buy that as well. Sometimes plants that are, go very well in more from Europe or in the UK, and they don't fare very well in Malta. And it's very difficult to overcome this. And I think to answer your question is that there are, the problems in the immediate reaction of people is like, remove everything and it will become but this is where we need to break it down to the really like small elements of how do I deal with this. So if I'm feeding sparrows and I'm getting a lot of sparrows in my balcony, how do I manage to keep a clean environment whilst having a relationship with nature?
Why have a clean environment in the first place? I mean,
because we've become so urbanized that anything that is natural becomes dirt, it becomes dirt.
challenging that a bit. Even urbanization is natural for us. It's not unnatural.
I think it's unnatural when we urbanize without including nature in it. And that is a problem that we're
Because we are nature. We are nature.
But we don't see ourselves like that. We see ourselves as outside.
So that is the problem. This dichotomy and duality. Let's move to another perspective. Joel, do you see a solution to this, to moving away from this appetite for urbanization towards dirty and messy and
I mean, in an ideal way, even if we're building apartments in a naive way, I can imagine courtyards, sort of having a place, a communal space within a block of apartments, if necessary, to meet up, to get messy. So for me, in the slightly naive, but at the same time in the reality that we're living in, where space is limited, is what it is.
sorry, as a community plan, is this possible at all? Are there models that show this?
There are so many examples, and there are opportunities in a very urbanized environment. If you take the building itself, the apartment block itself, there are balconies, there are roof spaces, there is curtilage by design. If you take then the scale of the block, you can design in front gardens, you can design in, if you take the scale then of the street, you can design in pocket parks, little you go to Utrecht, for example, little spaces, sometimes, the size of that tent, but which can be an ecosystem in themselves. Because the priority for nature is to create bridges. So the priority is to create a network of green spaces where organisms can jump and bridge. And so it's less, I think, I don't know if I'm wrong, it's less about the scale of it and more about the fact that there is a chain, a network, a continuity, which could be at different even heights. Yes, it needn't be on a level plane necessarily. So we can be creative, but we need to create opportunities. So sometimes it's the space of a parking, but you need to actually, create that green space.
Moving away from community to the personal and private. As a fanatic, a self-proclaimed fanatic, I confess. Is the ideal garden for you a place where one can be alone, or where one is with others?
I think both. I really enjoy my garden, but I do enjoy it as well when I have people come over, nature gets my head. I really love getting on my garden and having neighbors from the adjacent buildings and what a nice garden you have. But I would like coming upstairs and seeing it all over again. And when I left, telling me, oh no, you're leaving. Or the plants are going away. And I think communication is
It's a bit of both.
yes, it's a bit of both. I think communication is a very big thing. I think nowadays people are speaking up, they're complaining even on social media about the role of nature and new areas, and even people who are nature fanatics or urban fanatics, if we communicate with others, it's a bit contagious as well. I have colleagues which I literally just went to the office and told them, look, I have these seeds, if you want, just take them, or these cuttings which I'm trying to raise, and now 2 years on, we're suddenly having group gardens as well. So
that's the power of community in general. So now this is the moment where we come to paradise. So paradise is a bit of a, at least in Western culture, has a bit of a strange place, both as a garden, the garden rooted in literature, and as an imaginary or aspirational environment. In that, we read about it as an inhabited garden, as a gift that was given to the people involved. And it was also a space of transgression, so people were banished for one reason or another. Mario, this is your turn. Let's keep it very short. So my question or provocation here is goes back to this sense of responsibility, community, individual, and lack of the total absence of human intervention. What I in the beginning said is an incidental garden, something that grows spontaneously, if there is such a thing.
It goes back to what you were saying, what is the place of human nature. The Garden of Eden has been in Judaism and Christianity and Islam is dealing with that. Your place, the first job that God gives humans into this space is to tend the garden and then things go very wrong. I'm taking you over before Judaism, before the myth of Eden, because it comes from an ancient Persian myth, which is Paradis. Paradis is simply, very practically, a walled garden in the desert in Iran. And so it has a very practical function. You have a desert landscape where you lie, if you live there, and you need to create a space where humans can live, a community can live. So you need to grow food, you need to get water, which used to either get it from the mountains or through the canals. We have an example of canals here in Palestine, where you dig and the water comes out from the water table. And through the canals, they created a space within a desert landscape that was the Shahara, which is split in four, was used food, but then life revolved around that. Life revolved around this garden. So the king would also make agreements, trade agreements, whatever in the garden. So it was the heart of society. That is picked up later by various cultures, including Judaism first. And then there's the Arabic word, which hits home, which is Jannah. Jannah in Arabic, which obviously relates to Mota, to Motis as Jannah and Jinn. Jannah is not separate. Jannah is both the earthly garden, but the spiritual garden. And it's the same way. And I think that most people, even people from environmental movements, ultimately when we're dealing with what Giola is dealing with here, is dealing with this. It touches the outer and the inner, the metaphorical and the practical. They're not separate. They were never really.
They're not separate.
They're not separate. The practical aspect of the garden, of needing to grow food, is not separate from nurturing your own soul. And that is the same in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, in Zoroastrianism, in everything, in Hindu.
You mean, I'm not sure I'm not following. You mean gardening as a spiritual practice? But for me, gardening can be just growing a couple of oranges or having some herbs.
But in the process of doing it, you are not simply doing it from a function of this, you're doing it in terms of water.
Yes.
If you hear farmers, I spend a lot of time with farmers. When you talk to farmers who are doing farming for commercial purposes, when they speak, they're not just speaking from a purely mechanical, commercialistic point of view. They're speaking about their connection to the land.
This reminds me, you might remember that there was this farmer who had fired saying potatoes to my life.
Exactly. And people were making fun of them.
People were making fun of him.
But that was not funny at all.
No, it was. Okay, thank you, Mario. Giola, is your practice of gardening through photography spiritual practice, a functional practice? What is it? How would you place it within your life?
It's an observation, and it has this aspect of looking closer and looking with the camera with my eyes and see. I'm fascinated also with most of these plants here are dry leaves.
Right.
So even some of them which I collected when I was in Paris, people were looking, couldn't understand why I was calling them dry leaves. But they have a certain beauty of the decay and the process of they remain. There's a sense of even after they've been removed from their roots, it takes quite a while until they fade. And so for me, the garden is a space for contemplation, but also a space for observation and beauty and sort of seeing beauty in everything, seeing beauty in the depth of them, seeing beauty in the details. But it is sort of
It's a very romantic sort of idea of beauty of decay and enjoying, a whole discourse of beauty and capturing what we know is can't be captured.
yes, and it's a very romantic idea of the fact that even when things die, they remain beautiful.
Yes.
Yes, it is, but because a lot of people tend to look at rather than looking at the plant, they grow flowers. I think flowers are more it's fresh, it's beautiful, it's pretty. And so I want to show that even weeds can be pretty in this sense.
I mean, since you mentioned the flower, then of course there are all the roots that are missing here. And without roots there's no garden. Which will bring me to the question, when does a garden stop being a garden?
I think
When does it start being a garden?
I think the most practical answer is when you stop tending to it. And essentially, I think that's the critical guide. The garden ends. I've always had a garden, even when I was young. But there have been periods in my life, for example, when I was going to a bad time, that I neglected it all, and everything died. And then when things got better, I actually started to garden again. So it can be any thing that happened in your life that maybe the garden that died is actually a opportunity that's changed as well.
When a garden dies, I'm not sure how a garden dies. Because if you don't water the plants, or overwater them, they die. Something else comes up, something else sprouts. I'm not sure.
I think when
There's the passage from domesticated, cultivated to a bit of a wilder, incidental.
I think it's when you stop caring.
That's
Once that feeling goes for gardening, and you don't actually go there in the space, that's when it truly does.
Am I correct in saying there are directives or even law about not removing weeds from, what we consider weeds, from public spaces?
Not actually a directive, as far as I know,
Do you know what I'm saying?
the
There's
ecology for the bees, essentially some local councils signed this agreement saying that they will not before spring, essentially, or during spring, but not every single local council, and that's not really a law,
okay, so it's like a charter.
there's something that I think Giola picks up a lot. There's a concept in garden and landscaping that is that the garden hides and reveals. And I think Giola is really playing with that, consciously or unconsciously. And we've spoken a lot about us contemplating nature and contemplating the garden. However, Gordon also says that we are contemplated by nature. And I think this is an important aspect that also also we overlook that when we are in the garden or in the forest, it is not just us seeing and contemplating the garden, but we are experiencing being contemplated. And this is where I think urban spaces that are very like clinical urban spaces, that's why they name it sick, contemplated by all the living beings in nature, plants, birds, insects, because they look at us, and we can see them look at us in various ways. Whereas a bare building is not looking at you.
You have to have a positive ecosystem, and concrete doesn't necessarily a positive ecosystem. But the point I wanted to make in relation to what you were saying, walking around and observing the photos, I think there is a point to be made about change and how comfortable we as humans are with change. Because in my profession as a planner, I feel that people are not comfortable with change, even if the change is going to be positive. The transition into something is very uncomfortable. So, for example, we speak about pedestrianizing the space or greening a space. Even if people are convinced, because there are many case studies where pedestrianization is a positive move, well, even if they are convinced that green spaces are important, the change in the infrastructure, the change in the lifestyle, the change in what we experience is something which many people seem to be uncomfortable with. And these images, to me, speak about change. No? They speak about decay, about death and life. And so I think we have a conversation about being comfortable in a garden space that changes continuously, and that sometimes we have a little control over. Because the concrete, the grey infrastructure, the tarmac, is very permanent. So we are comfortable with that. It is unlikely to change. But in a garden, you need to be very comfortable with things suddenly dying or growing or leaves or doors. That's right.
And I think it takes time and attention, which it takes a lot of time and attention. It's true that if we don't tend to them, they die and then it grows into something else. But if you want to have sort of a garden that you can eat from or something that gives you back, you need to tend to it to a certain extent. And a lot of people see it as very time-consuming, and in fact, during COVID, a lot of people all of a sudden became plant lovers, and there was this trend of having plants and caring for a plant. I don't know if this is still existing or growing. But yes, because people had more time, automatically they found solace in it.
I mean, linking what you just said about having time to dedicate to these pursuits and accepting change and recognizing and accepting change. I think one of the lessons that gardens, or let's say tending, the action of tending to a garden regularly, because you can't tend to a garden once a year, because that's the thing. One of the lessons learned through that commitment is slowness. So, it's easy for me today to go to small gardens or wherever and buy a huge tree and say, I have a huge tree in my garden. Doesn't necessarily mean that I've committed, these past 20 years to growing that tree. So this opportunity that gardens give us is also an opportunity to slow down and recognize, acknowledge that there are other rhythms to life than the immediacy of concrete and the stability of that, and the pace that implies in our everyday life.
And I think that slowness is being lost by the younger generations. I mean, last Friday I had a workshop. 1 or 2 people had a garden or had a garden close to home.
As we said at the beginning, you need to see what they understand by a garden. Some people would think of San Antonio as the only garden possible. What Mario is saying is, listen, a couple of pots, a roof garden, however big or small, a patch in the corner, those are all gardens. So that's why at the beginning we were with this, examining what we understand about the garden, what constitutes a garden.
Okay.
Of course,
Of course. Before I moved back into the space, because acoustics are not really better, because at least your masterpiece is here with us, and I really appreciate that. And secondly, I was thinking about the sensory you mentioned, and we have an orchard, quite a big orchard. And I was just thinking, certain things I wasn't even quite aware of, maybe even right now it's full of white blossoms, the color of the white like snow. And in the winter, the baubles are like Christmas baubles, the oranges, just makes it look so sensory part. Also, you mentioned bees, but before we haven't mentioned insects much at all. And I was not aware, like they're all hidden except the flying ones. A university study found we had so many, I can't remember the number, different ants, species of ants. For me, an ant was an ant. But, but in the research, I had no idea at all. So I'm very oblivious. I enjoy the aesthetic value of the place and what producing it. You mentioned the messy. And I remember teaching my grandson how to pot, and he was going, like finding his hands all dirty. And I said, don't you play with sand? The sand is fun for him. So I said, this is the same thing. So translation for it is very important as well. I came, because I'm a psychotherapist, quite alienated really from nature. Thank God there are people who are more in tune than I am to nature. With the word, phase. That is what I related to. And thankfully, you mentioned life and death, because yes, the death part is not really acknowledged as part of the life part. So that is what I really appreciate that you included. Because we are tending, we use medicines to keep us alive. We were so afraid of the concept of change and death that there's something beautiful in the dying part that we need to not be afraid of anymore. Now, that's very difficult for us to stomach. Also, people are moving, a lot of groups that are including psychology with nature, that are, for example, encouraging grounding. That you go and walk with your feet in the soil, which I've been practicing. It's really helps the stress we talked about, the grounding in nature. And if you lie down on the ground and look up at the sky, in between the trees and the leaves, that is when we can journey inwards and connect the inwards with the outwards and really focus on what's going on, where am I in life, because that humbles us to, instead of feeling the power that we own everything, we are just also inclusive as part of nature too. So, I think
there are these opportunities that green spaces and gardens in themselves offer, and this move towards creating technologies, as it were, that help us reconnect with nature. Creating those technologies, lying on the floor as a practice, walking barefoot as a practice, and all of this as a practice, is symptomatic of some kind of dissatisfaction with the concrete, with the urban environment and so on. So it's saying, no, I don't want any more of this, I don't want any more of this, I don't want any more of that. Then you find a way back to what I want.
In fact, we're trying to promote design that removes the famous conca, the plant, so that in a public garden there is a seamless transition from the path to the soil. So you need paths yes, but it would be ideal for you to simply step off the path very, very quickly. We have a tradition here of creating these raised planters. So you create this very, very strong barrier between where I walk and what I look at. Whereas there shouldn't be that barrier. You should be able to wander into the softer ground, to feel, like you said, with your feet, to touch. You know, there shouldn't be spaces which you are sort of unconsciously told, don't come here. So we're trying to foster the practice really.
Let me play devil's advocate here. I can see the reasoning behind that sort of approach. When we construct gardens, and here I have in mind, I'll tell you in a second. When we construct gardens as sacred spaces, not just the cloisters, but for example, even for aesthetic reasons or for other meditative processes, and I have in mind the Zen garden. The fact that it's in a defined space, it's already signaling that, you know, my being from here onwards is going to change. My state of being, my way of seeing the world, and my way of seeing myself is going to change from this step onwards. So I think there is also value in creating these gated, walled gardens, defined spaces which are to a degree inaccessible. But more than that, which tell us, look, this is where you stop your concrete self. And this is where you start to move towards a more fluid and for example, the interesting part with Zen gardens for me is the aridity. So the taking away of the 10 million ants that there might be. You know, the softness of, okay, the Zen garden might have a water feature, but the softness of the ground, the sand and so on.
But I mean, it's not a Zen garden, but most gardens are not garden. They are
Right.
a lot of the gardens that exist are already, but I think that we need more access for more open gardens rather than open gardens.
I'm sorry, I'm going to get yours in there. I love Zen gardens and I don't like looking at Zen gardens, but Zen gardens don't have these. And what I feel we lack in Malta is the integration of what is more the soil and plants into the urban environment. In Dina, for example, where I was very well, Dina is very organic. People you walk into Dina, people feel happy, children start laughing. The parents tend to let go of the hand of their kids because there are no cars or few cars. And children start laughing. Indina could have a lot more elements that are green, but elements that are green that are part of nature. And this is where we let, like biophilia. Biophilia is, you know, the integration of nature in architecture. In Malta, we tend to think of nature again as large trees, for example, or northern kind of natural environments. I think what we need to try to do for is to learn how to integrate who we are, where we are in terms of land and geography into what becomes urbanization. So a lot more vines, for example, and a lot more rosemary, which has been and this is
Sign not so much because it doesn't.
it's difficult to grow, I know.
It doesn't give you a lush visual.
But we need that, we need to have a reflection of who we are, where we are, in the climate that we are. But then, that is where urbanization can actually help us. Then you can have arches, for example, that create shade. And then you can grow other trees. And this is what I see lacking mostly, particularly Mercury Towers. I mean, I cannot say that Mercury Towers is ugly. It has its fascinates, you know, but it doesn't give me a sense of place, it doesn't give me a sense of It's grand, it's majestic, but in a way that displaces me. And whereas Nina makes me feel, this works. this is home in a climate that, you know, and we need more Indianish feel.
What do you feel, Lou?
I think what you mentioned is we need more gardens too. I really love going somewhere and seeing like traditional plants, but I'm like, oh, this is actually really on the Maltese. We need to put that.
Something interesting is one of the indigenous plants was the and it is one of the indigenous plants that I found almost in the garden area. Yes. So because that's where I started from. I started about researching and I was to act to the question of about indigenous plants and the plants that they get. And then I went to Bali and one very consistent plant that I found was a plant like an intestinal pot. It existed in trees.
Am I wrong in saying nuts need lots of water, no? No? You never will.
Not in Bali.
I'm not trying to say we need to plant on the Maltese and not plant the legumes of the Maltese.
Well, that's a discussion.
That's also another philosophical discussion. But what I'm saying is we need to incorporate more that is ours, because often we go into the in terms of people, which I don't subscribe to. But what I'm saying is we Maltese do not value who we are, where we are, and where we are at. But I don't mind, I think I wish they do more. We can have flowering plants in urban spaces. They're not necessarily Maltese. Very urbanized environments, you can play a lot with plants. Then you can have more, you know, indigenous or landrace or local plants included in landscaping. And I think this is the balance that I don't think we are finding, because we go to extremes. Like remove every acacia tree from every valley. You know, or every eucalyptus tree. We go to extremes.
And that's also, you know, the way we legislate. Because, I mean, yeah, because you can't change it. There's no half measure. Yeah, I another
Forgetting medicinal properties.
Oh, there are lots of yes. One last 5 minutes, and I'd like to focus a bit on the work here, because we've very touched on this. So my first, when I came in, my first observation was that there are human figures or human faces, as I said in the beginning. And I told myself, you know, why are you expecting human figures and human faces? So that was my first observation. I don't know about you. What was your first observation?
I think my first observation was that there was a lack. I think I expected more. And then as I came to appreciate the work, I realized that there was a lot being said. And then it created an interesting dichotomy inside me regarding our expectation of a lot, but the importance of finding value in a faded landscape, and the importance of finding value in something that is dead or that is creating an opportunity for regrowth. So I went through this journey of needing to look at the detail because there wasn't a lot around me, and that was a beautiful experience.
It's an interesting observation because usually an exhibition would have 30, 50 pieces. And I suppose you have about 150 here, 200. But just like in a garden, they're all in one ecosystem.
It's an invitation to concentrate, and that is, I think, important in the very hectic world that we live in. It was a nice moment of concentrating on several of the images that we are seeing.
I think what I the first thought that came to my mind was the fact that these are lots of things that most people do not notice. I think what I expected was lots of bright colors, maybe lots of flowers and stuff like that. So it's actually refreshing to see something different.
And close to colors of our gardens, no? Besides the color.
I think the color that of from the inside.
No, some of the faded colors are what we find in our gardens. You don't want to find bright colors in your garden. Is there anything that
For me, this was a Theodolf. He's a Dutch garden and landscape garden. In fact, I messaged Giola, very familiar. You like Theodolf? Not really. I don't know. You have to look at his work. And definitely, I would invite Giola to visit his work. Because he picks up on these things, on light and depth, dry landscapes, plants that also, when they are dying, they create a beautiful effect. So for me, it was like, this is a Theodolf.
I think that is positive.
Very positive. In Vienna, he landscaped lots of roundabouts. I mean, the effect is very dramatic. And Vienna was even more dramatic because you have a much bigger contrast between, exactly.
One little observation from my side is that what we're seeing here is not to scale. So you get much bigger, let's say, close-ups, looks. It allows you to look at things much more closely. I remember looking at the Aurica this and saying, "Is that real? Is that real?" And I said, "Oh, no." I know that very, very well. Close and common, Giola, can you just tell us how this developed, the whole project developed, your discussions with the E's, and what you do differently, How did it start?
So it started, as I said, from this reflection on the playfulness in my grandmother's garden and the loss of it. And it was a pre-mourning, something which I foresee is going to disappear very soon. And so these discussions totally started with how am I going to show that I am mourning.
Elise is the curator.
Elise was the curator. How am I going to show a mourning of something that hasn't come to pass yet? So I started, it was a number of discussions, and then I started to meet people, and each person involved. So I went to private gardens, and each garden I went to, I discussed, and a lot of people showed concern about they don't know what's going to happen from this space. So I gathered these leaves because I knew I wanted to work with. There was a time where I reverted back to maybe considering flowers and life, and so it was going back and forth to explore the possibility of using flowers. But then I went back to home and nesting, and something that was very important to me is it's not only a loss of home for us, but also for the ecosystem, as we mentioned. And so there was a time where I spoke to bird life to understand the different shelter or a refuge for us, but and so I decided to explore this further. I think if I were to do something different, I would enlarge it. I think it could have been larger, and so because there are so many more gardens.
Also larger to accommodate more work.
More work in terms of collecting more leaves, creating more diversity of the leaves, different gardens as well. So I think.
Can you say something about the process, please?
Yes, so the process was, because I photographed these in a lot of detail, but then they are transferred onto the drapery, and the drapery, I put acetone, so it's a very chemical aspect of it, and I wrapped onto paper, and so it transferred onto the drapery, and that leaves it faded, and this aspect is intentional, right? I also decided to use the concrete blocks because the concrete, each one has a board and it's on a garden and has been lost. So I wanted to put concrete, but not in a sort of this is in a more. It has a purpose as well. It's holding the tent down. So the concrete does have a purpose. I mean, it's our home, right? But it's trying to create these tensions.
And a compliment to the person who built the test.
Mr. Cassar. So the tent was built together with the seamstress who did a fantastic job because first we built the tent all together and the seamstress then created the structure. But it was a discussion between the carpenter and the seamstress and testing it out and making sure that it works well and then going back and forth. It was
so, thank you. Thank you for inviting us. Sure. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Ethelbert. Thank you, Mario and Giola. Quite a few reflections. For me, what I take away from this is that gardens are, spaces that we need for ourselves, but they're also, in many ways, expressions of love for what's come, expressions of responsibility in that sense of love and care towards each other, towards other fauna, and towards the future of the planet, if you like. So, thank you once again. Thank you for sharing, for your participation, and enjoy the exhibition.